all beings be happy. May all beings be healthy. May all beings be free from harm. May all beings love life. May all beings awaken. Welcome to another Cuke Audio podcast. I'm DC Puba of Cuke Audio and Cuke Archives, preserving the legacy of Shunryu Suzuki and those whose paths crossed his, and anything else that comes to mind. I pray that you and yours are safe and comfortable, free from economic hardship, and able to get out and do whatever it is you want within the limitations of the universal precept of do as little harm as possible. So today, there's more Tassajara Stories. So when you hear the bell, if you're of such a mind, hit pause and join us in meditation or whatever for as long as you wish. And when you wish to return, hit unpause, and we'll be there to hit the bell to end the meditation, and we'll get going on Tassajara Stories. Trungpa. Suzuki asked a Tassajara visitor from outside our Soto sect to speak in the Zendo right after he'd met him. A Tibetan teacher, a Rinpoche named Chogyam Trungpa, came to Tassajara accompanied by his young Scottish wife Diana, Sam and Hazel Burkholz, and John Baker. They arrived late and were put up in our best stone rooms. I'd met Sam before several times at his little Buddhist bookstore in Berkeley, Shambhala. Diane and I served them a special late dinner in the dining room that the kitchen whipped up from leftovers. At the end of the meal, Suzuki and Mel, his geisha, joined them. I was busy going back and forth with trays of dishes and beverages. Diane did the actual serving. That night, she told me what she'd seen and felt. At the beginning, she said, Suzuki and Trungpa smiled and introduced each other, and they each said a little bit, and slowly more words came, and they seemed to be getting along. She said the room was pretty dark, and I remember that. Normally, if the room was used for a meal or meeting with lots of people, we'd have the generator on up at the shop, and the room would be lit. No need that night. The kerosene lamps don't illuminate that much, but they're adequate. Diane experienced light beginning to fill the room. She saw Suzuki and Trungpa look at each other with sparkles in their eyes. I didn't notice any of that, but I did pick up that they and everyone were having a most comfortable time, and Diane was smiling broadly. Trungpa was lame from an auto accident, walked with a cane, and had corrective shoes that he wore into the Zendo for his talk, which was clear and well received. Alan, who was more eclectic in his spiritual experiences and interests than anyone else, went to the Pine Room where Trungpa was staying and asked questions about Tibetan Buddhism. Alan had a bad hangover the next morning from that visit and told me that Trungpa would alternate between pouring him another drink and poking and hitting him with his cane in response to his questions. Stan was in charge of guests. Trungpa's party were the only ones, as the guest season hadn't started yet. When Suzuki left the dining room after spending time with Trungpa, he asked Stan to come to his room. Suzuki gave him a box of powdered incense to give to Trungpa and Diana, his wife. Diana answered the door of Pine 2 and invited Stan in. Trungpa was in back, so Stan presented the incense to Diana, bowing his head down respectfully. Diana did the same, and they bumped heads, which caused Stan to drop the box, spilling the powdered incense on the floor. Trungpa came up and saw the two of them on the floor getting the incense back in the box. I told him, Stan said, that it was a gift from Suzuki Roshi, and he looked at me and said, "Would you like to have a drink?" And I don't usually drink whiskey, but we had some scotch, and he said, "Have another." And we stayed up all night drinking and smoking. They took a break, though, for Trungpa to give a talk in the Zendo, which Stan said was crystal clear. When the Han hit for morning zazen, Stan excused himself and went to the Zendo. Later, Suzuki said to him, "He's a Buddhist." I went over to the fireplace room after zazen, but I could see through the window that Alan and Stan were fully involved with him and his whiskey. And then Ruvain came. I spent time with so many guests, I thought, let them enjoy it. There's enough visitors in there. So I went back to my room. Ruvain gave an animated report the next day. When Chogyam Trungpa came to Tassajara, he sat in a chair in the Zendo. Ruvain was carrying the stick, didn't know who his guest was, and told him to turn around and face the wall like everyone else. Trungpa obliged. Then Ruvain heard Trungpa give a talk in the Zendo, which he thought was most lucid. He went to the stone room to check him out. Trungpa and I were talking, Ruvain said, about desire, and he said you've got to burn it out. We had several talks about desire. He said it's like the soles on our shoes. The only way to wear them out is to walk on them. Well, that made perfect sense to me. Tatsugami had told us to stop serving meat to guests, but it wasn't yet discontinued. The guest season hadn't quite started, but there was some chicken in a fridge freezer. I found no one wanted to cook meat for Trungpa and his group. I made them a midnight feast with the chicken plus cosmic bread, which is what he'd renamed our gruel bread, made with various leftovers mixed into the batter. And he made a salad with vegetables that he had just picked in the dark. He gave us interviews. I had a couple. I liked him a lot. He told me he was going to start a center in Colorado and told me to come. But I liked Roshi's way and felt more comfortable with him. A number of people talked to me about their experience with Trungpa in that brief visit of Tassajara, and it made a big impression on each one of them. And one thing I found very interesting was each one of them, when they told me what happened with him, they told it as if they were the only person there other than him. Nobody mentioned anybody else. They weren't being self-centered. They were being focused on Trungpa. Larry. In the early 70s, at an evening meeting of students, the agenda had been covered and we were all sitting around the dining room enjoying the energy of being together and not wanting to go back to our cabins in bed. And Suzuki wasn't there to say, maybe this is already too much talk. The tables were pushed against the walls, and 50 or so of us sat on straight-backed wooden chairs loosely arranged in an oval. We didn't meet much like that. Someone broke the silence by saying he'd like to conduct a poll on a topic of interest to him. The director, who was leading the meeting, Peter, said, "Okay, why not?" "How many people here have taken LSD?" he asked. Most hands shot up. The room filled with laughter. "Do mescaline or psilocybin count?" a student asked. "Yes," she was told. The student added her hand and a few others went up. More laughter. Then the pollster asked who had more than one trip, and a number of hands went down. The line of questioning continued. How many have had 5? More hands down. 10, 15, and up the line with oohs and ahs until only a few hands remained. At 100, only one person's hand was up. Rebs. He'd meditated frequently on LSD for years before coming to the Zen Center. Ministers, priests, psychologists, and various types of spiritual teachers back in the 60s had an interesting situation to deal with. Young people were coming to them who'd had psychedelic experiences and who were looking for an explanation of what they'd experienced, seeking a more grounded and lasting way to meet the vastness of higher consciousness. Most of these counselors had no idea what to say or summarily dismissed these experiences as bogus. Some, like Shunryu Suzuki, were more helpful. Suzuki had a way that worked with such seekers. He did not dismiss the validity of their experience, but said that enlightenment was not a state of mind, was not contained in any experience, and he guided us away from trying to recreate past profound events and toward accepting ourselves as we were. He taught a disciplined life of zazen, attention to the details of life, not wanting too much, including to be someone else, and not getting too worked up. He said that people will have enlightenment experiences without spiritual practice, but only with such practice will their revelation continue and not come and go like psychedelic experiences. He made us feel confident that we could wake up to who we were without any chemical aids, and he did it without taking any strong stand against marijuana and LSD, though we knew he didn't want people to come to the temple high. Taking LSD without proper precautions can lead to some unexpected initiations, even if one thought that every care had been taken. I'm reminded of Mark Lewis, a high school student from Carmel who in 1968 went with a friend to Tassajara, an hour and a half away, for their first acid trip. Anyone who'd read about how to take LSD knew that one should pick a trouble-free setting, preferably a natural one, and take it when one has a calm state of mind. Mark and his friend took it en route, figuring they'd be at Tassajara before the acid came on, and that all they'd encounter would be the inspiring vibes of the monastery and the nurturing warmth of the hot springs there. They were coming in late, after everyone was asleep. They thought they were in a safe and controlled setting. But they didn't count on Larry. Larry had been in a biker gang in my hometown of Fort Worth. He had a steel plate in his head that was inserted after a motorcycle accident. He was a big, tough, sweet guy who was trying to set his life straight. Larry had stumbled upon Tassajara while riding his motorcycle on the challenging road. Normally, we didn't take students who just showed up and would not have let him stay without first having some Zen practice experience elsewhere. But it was the more relaxed guest season. He was a mechanic, and we didn't have one at the time, so he'd been living there on a temporary basis, working in the shop, trying hard to sit zazen at least a little and to fit in with the community. Sometimes he'd get out of sorts, and I'd take him to the kitchen and make him a stack of cheese sandwiches, and that would calm him down. Larry had gone to Monterey in our pickup truck to buy parts and get a lumber order. Kathy Cook, a sensitive and attractive young woman student who needed to go to the dentist, went with him. He promised he wouldn't drink, but the urge got the best of him. On their way back to Tassajara that night, she did not like the way he smelled or his driving and thought the lumber on the rack was not loaded properly as it kept shifting. When they stopped to view the stars from the top of the mountain, she got out of the vehicle and said she'd walk the rest of the way. Larry, who had a hopeless crush on Kathy, sat in the pickup and sulked. Meanwhile, Mark and his friend were bouncing up to Chews Ridge. The acid was beginning to come on earlier than they expected, and time had become elastic. They couldn't tell if they'd been driving for minutes or hours. They pulled up next to Larry on the dirt road and asked how far Tassajara was. Larry told them it was about 5 miles down the road. He added, "And if you see a woman up ahead walking on the road, don't stop for her." They perceived menace in his voice. They drove on and indeed came upon a woman waving her arms at them. She stuck her head in the open window and told them she'd just gotten out of the pickup they'd passed because the driver was drunk and she was sure he was going to go off the road. They told her they'd give her a ride, but warned her they were on LSD, and for the first time, they continued down the road with Kathy sitting between them. Mark drove very carefully, slowly due to his mind-expanded condition, and also so that Larry couldn't drive too fast. They were not too stoned to have forgotten what Larry had told them and how big and scary he was. Now he was driving behind them, looking at her sitting between them. The boys discussed this and worked themselves up into a state of near panic, which didn't ease Kathy's mind. On the final stretch, they sped up, leaving Larry behind. Down at Tassajara, I was the fire watch, the person whose duty it is to walk around, blow out the Coleman lamps on the pathways, make sure all kerosene lamps in the cabins were out, and periodically strike together 2 wooden clackers that announced all was well and nighty-night. I heard a vehicle approaching and could tell by the engine's whine that it wasn't the pickup truck I was expecting. I walked up toward the gate in time to see the car lights pull over to the side and shut off. I heard car doors open and close and saw 2 shadowy figures dart into the tall grass between the road and the creek. Then Kathy was walking fast down the road, crying. I tried to talk to her, but she went right past me. I was just about to go check the 2 in the grass out when the pickup truck came weaving in through the open gate and screeched to an abrupt halt beside me. I was confused. Why didn't she come back with Larry? I shined my flashlight on him and saw his puffy, unshaven face with a menacing gleam in his eye. A gust of alcohol-laden breath wafted into my face. He asked, "Where's Kathy? And where are those two guys?" I said she'd gone to her room and I didn't know where they were. He looked back outside the gate, then abruptly went to the tool shed. When I asked things like, "What's up, Larry?" and tried to talk, he single-mindedly went through the sharpened axes. I was greatly relieved, though not for long, when he finally settled on a long axe handle. "Those goddamn guys picked her up after I told them not to, and I'm going to find them and beat their goddamn brains out," he said. He then proceeded to walk toward the exact spot where they were as I stayed close to his side and tried to dissuade him. Finally, I said they weren't up there. They'd gone to bed, and we could all talk about it in the next day. "They've gone to bed where?" he asked. I said, "I had no idea. Probably some cabin." "Then I'm going to go through every goddamn cabin till I find them," he said, and started down the road with me literally hanging on to him and pleading for him to reconsider. The students could deal with him, but not the guests. Oh, Lord. I finally convinced him that at least he should take a break and have some cheese sandwiches. We went to the kitchen where I lit a lamp and made him 5 thick cheese sandwiches. He ate them, got sleepy, and soon I was tucking him in bed. Mark and his friend lay in the tall grass all right, surely hallucinating. Surely hallucinating mind-expanded nightmares of violent death. The next morning, Larry was driven out, sad and ashamed. Mark was much more careful after that about his use of psychedelics and went on to become a Zen student who didn't use them anymore. Well, maybe a little pot now and then, but he never forgot his first time. Just think, he could have been arrested and sent to jail for taking LSD by a legal system which has no more sense or subtlety than Larry did. A zealous, persecutorial-type legal system which can't be deflected by bribes of mere cheese sandwiches. This has been another Cuke audio podcast. Tassajara Stories. I'm DC. Poobah of Cuke Audio and Cuke Archives, coming to you from sleepy Sonora with Dogette Bandita, Feline Cuchita, and dear lovely Katrinka. And we're wishing you and yours and all of us a grand awakening.